Hello everyone, my name is Mehlaka Samdani. Welcome to a new program series called Critical Conversations, a current affairs show that will focus on political, social and religious trends in the Muslim world. We will talk to policy analysts, social critics, authors and academics to go beyond the headlines and gain a more nuanced understanding of hot topic issues related to the Muslim world. The program is produced by Critical Connections, an organization based in Western Massachusetts that seeks to address divides between American Muslims and society at large. For our inaugural show, we are joined today by Ethan Casey, a journalist and author of Alive and Well in Pakistan. This is a fascinating and riveting account of Ethan's many visits to the country, for the first time in 1995 and most recently in 2011. Alive and Well in Pakistan is a book of personal narrative nonfiction that has been praised as compulsory reading for anyone visiting Pakistan by the Harvard International Review. Given the complicated nature of US-Pakistan relations, Ethan in his book provides a refreshing perspective on the social and cultural context of this relationship, and we are delighted to have him join us. Ethan, welcome to the program.
It's great to be here.
Well, thank you so much for coming. So we'll start with a very basic question. You've traveled to Pakistan multiple times, but what as an American first took you to the country in 1995?
There are different ways to answer that question. Most directly, I was a journalist based in Bangkok at the time. I lived in Bangkok from 1993 to 1998. I had a job at the Bangkok Post English language newspaper as a copy editor. But I decided after a few months, I came all the way to Bangkok and I'm sitting at a desk in an air-conditioned office building. What's wrong with this picture? So I quit that job and I went off to India, and then from there eventually to Pakistan. But the reason I went to India, rather than continuing to travel around Southeast Asia, which I also did, but the reason I was particularly interested in going to India was that the situation in Kashmir was really heating up at that time. The siege of the Hazrat Bal Mosque was current. The Indian Army surrounding this important mosque in Srinagar, the capital of Indian-held Kashmir, and with militants holed up with hostages inside. That was a major international story at the time. And I wanted to go see that for myself.
Wow.
And I was also a little bit, felt romantic about going to the place that V.S. Naipaul had written about in his book, An Area of Darkness. So I was really compelled by both that topical, I'm a journalist, I want to see this current story unfold, not just the siege of the mosque, but the Kashmir situation in general, which I could tell was an important thing that needed to be written about and covered. And also a sense of I want to follow in the footsteps of this great writer. There's a whole long story that ensues from that, much of which I tell in my book. But I'm very proud that in my book, Alive and Well in Pakistan, several of the early chapters focus very heavily on my early experience in the Indian-occupied portion of Kashmir, not Pakistan itself. And I think that those worlds are interpenetrating. Obviously, they connect to each other. There is no clear dividing line between India and Kashmir and Pakistan. It's all one world, one civilization, and that's part of the message of my book as I write it.
Absolutely, and I mean, and that the dispute surrounding Kashmir continues today and has really played a huge role in the way the two countries perceive each other and military relations between the two countries. But then from India, how did you end up in Pakistan?
Well, and it was because of my interest in Kashmir that I ended up in Pakistan. So I spent some months traveling around India in 1994, and I knew when I first went to India that Kashmir was going to be part of that. I went to Kashmir, spent I think a total of 8 weeks on 3 separate visits to Kashmir in 1994 and 95. Did a lot of really hard work on the ground as a journalist. And again, that's reflected in my book, Alive and Well in Pakistan. But and at the time, I wanted to write a book about the Kashmir situation. For understandable reasons, it was not easy to find a publisher for such a book. But in order to do justice to that subject, I knew that I had to go to Pakistan. That I couldn't just write, I couldn't get the Indian point of view and the Kashmiri point of view without also getting the Pakistani point of view on Kashmir specifically. So I crossed the border at Wagah in March 1995 and showed up in Lahore,
Wow.
and one thing led to another, and here I am.
Wow. And did you know anybody in Lahore at the time?
No, I didn't. I didn't.
Wow.
I was just a young journalist, a young American journalist. I showed up, said, "Hi, I'm Ethan. I'm from America. I'm a journalist." Yeah.
I'd be interested to hear how you were received as, I mean, it was a time of relative calm, perhaps, 1995, but how you were received by the general population. You know, Alex Bilius of the Daily Telegraph speaks of your book and your travels to Pakistan, and he says the author's real journey is a search for common humanity. I'd be interested to hear that as a young American, you know, who was sort of adventurous and wanting to explore the country, what preconceived notions about Pakistan did you have, if at all you had any, and how some of these were either reinforced or challenged by your visit at that time?
Well, one of the great things for me is that I got to experience Pakistan back in that time when Americans in general didn't have as many preconceived notions about Pakistan. It's really hard to remember back to that time anymore, but in the 90s, official America as well as the American public were just not paying attention to Pakistan.
Sure.
The Afghan war had come and gone, and very, very explicitly, very consciously, the American establishment decided we are going to disengage from Pakistan. In the new edition of my book, I include an essay at the end called The World According to Foreign Affairs, The Case of Pakistan. And what it is a study of the journal Foreign Affairs, arguably the house organ of the American foreign policy establishment, and how it did and did not pay attention to Pakistan during the 1990s and into the 2000s. One of the really shocking things that I discovered was that between 1992 and 2002, there actually was no single full-length article devoted to Pakistan in the pages of Foreign Affairs. And the one that was published in 1992 was by a professor from Johns Hopkins University, and his whole argument was basically, we've now kicked out the Russians from Afghanistan, the Berlin Wall has fallen, there are other parts of the world that America should be paying attention to, we don't have to engage with Pakistan anymore.
And that's so interesting because, I mean, it was right around 1995 and 96 that the Taliban, who had been in Pakistan until that time in refugee camps, were now returning and were really coalescing into what then became the Afghan government of the Afghan Taliban.
And the Taliban were, when I first went to Pakistan in 95, you would read in the Pakistani papers and hear in conversations, oh, there's this group, the Taliban, and they seem to be taking over most of the country, and maybe that'll be good because there's been this you know, nobody's been in charge in Afghanistan. We'll know who to deal with. Maybe they'll be better than these other warlords. Well, that was wishful at best, of course.
Absolutely. And I mean, of course, there was that, you know, Pakistan's very overt support to this Taliban movement. They were going to bring some semblance of stability to Afghanistan, which had its own internecine warfare going on. And so I think that was the time to pay for the U.S. foreign policy establishment to pay attention. But
yes, but they weren't. But I, as a young American unofficial person slash independent journalist, could show up and really, in an innocent way, experience Pakistan on its own terms.
Absolutely.
And that was the wonderful benefit for me of being able to travel in Pakistan in that time when there wasn't felt to be that much at stake officially.
Absolutely. And how long were you there for when you were there in 1995?
Well, I think I made 2 trips in 95, each for about a month.
I
was still based in Bangkok. I had been traveling in India, so I had, you know, several months in the subcontinent in 95 and back and forth to Bangkok a couple of times. And but each time I've been to Pakistan, it's always been for at least several weeks at a time.
And then you went back for, I think, was it in 2003?
Right.
Perhaps for to actually take up a teaching position there. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, I had been there in 99 as well, which was a very interesting year to be in Pakistan because that was the year of the coup.
Sure.
I wasn't there at the time of the coup, but because I had been in Pakistan twice for extended visits earlier in 99, I could smell the coup coming.
Oh, wow, yeah.
And I have views on that, which I'd be happy to share if we want to get into that kind of stuff.
And just for the benefit of our audience, we're talking about the Musharraf-led coup.
Right, of October 1999, when General Musharraf took over from Prime Minister Nawaz Sharif.
Sure.
Yeah. So jumping forward to your question, getting to live in Pakistan in 2003, I was, as a journalist, as the kind of journalist I was an Asia hand, right, in a general sort of way, and with more of a focus on Southeast Asia because I was based in Bangkok, and I had spent time in Burma and Cambodia and Indonesia and all the very interesting countries of Southeast Asia. And I had spent time in Pakistan, and I had tried to write this book about Kashmir, but no Indian publisher was interested, and no Western publisher was interested because the Western world was not interested in Pakistan and in Kashmir at the time. And so then I was living. I burned out on living in Asia. I went and lived in England, which I don't recommend, by the way, to any freelance journalist because it's one of the most expensive countries in the world.
Right.
And I was sitting in England, kind of minding my own business, not even feeling that I was necessarily going to continue being engaged with Pakistan. And out of the blue, I got an email from a Pakistani acquaintance, Isa Daud Pota, saying, there's a new university opening in Lahore. Do you know anybody who might like to spend a semester teaching there?
Wow.
And I thought for about 2.5 seconds, and I said, yeah, I know somebody.
That's great.
And I think it was March or so of 2003 that Isa sent me that email, and on September 11th, the 2-year anniversary of September 11th, I landed in Lahore.
My goodness.
And spent 5 months living in Lahore, teaching at Beacon House National University.
Sure.
I was founding faculty of the School of Media and Communications. BNU has burgeoned into a really wonderful institution, very arts-oriented.
Absolutely.
In the 10 years or so since then. And so I'm kind of proud to say I was founding faculty.
Well, that's amazing. Yeah. And I'm interested to know how Pakistanis sort of perceived this other visit of yours, just because, you know, in Pakistan, and I'm from there, you know, we have this notion every time you see an American, the first thing that they think of is he must be a CIA agent. Did you get any of that while you were there?
I do get that. I mean, of course I get it, and I kind of laugh it off. You know, sometimes I say, you know, I am with the CIA, but I'm so undercover that I don't even know it. You know,
that even you don't.
But and that is a joke, just for the record. That's a joke.
Sure.
And people do laugh. It's always nervous laughter because they never really quite know. You know.
Sure.
But for example, I was, and I'm not. But,
just to be clear.
Yeah. But. I attended a one-day cricket match at Gaddafi Stadium in Lahore in September 2003, and there's an extended account of that in my book. And my book is really all about the human encounters, the ordinary people I met, the things they had to say, you know, intelligent things, dumb things, well-informed things, ill-informed things, the stories they have to tell not only about their awareness of public events, but also their lives.
Sure.
And it's a travel book. It's a nonfiction narrative. It's not a book of policy or current events. But you can't write about Pakistan without current events always being part of the story.
Absolutely, it's always part of the news.
Yeah,
and so, I mean, you know, what were your perceptions? I mean, you said there weren't too many, but by the time you had gone back in 2003 and you had a chance to live there for a significant period of time and sort of be very close, you know, proximity with all the students and everything, what notions by then were either challenged or reinforced?
Well, that's 9/11 had happened in the meantime. So Pakistan had changed, but it hadn't changed. And again, that refers back to the fact that I was able to have extensive experience of Pakistan back in the 90s when the stakes were not felt to be so high.
Sure.
I could just show up and encounter Pakistan on its own terms, the good, the bad, and the ugly. You know, it's a messy country. It's a country that's always in turmoil. Nothing is ever settled in Pakistan, as Emma Duncan, author of Breaking the Curfew, you know, puts it well. So I got to know Pakistan in its own genuine unsettledness in the 90s. Then 9/11 happened. Then 2 years after that, I show up again.
Right.
So you would think that everything would have changed. Well, some things had changed.
Like what?
Well, there was a military government for one thing, right? But it wasn't a Zia-ul-Haq style military government.
Right.
And it wasn't really a dictatorship, and Musharraf was not really a dictator. He was not really he was too democratic to be a dictator and too dictatorial to be a democratic leader,
Sure,
right? He was a
sure.
strange kind of hybrid animal. But surprisingly, Pakistan seemed pretty stable and pretty calm and pretty well settled at that time. Now, I think that was an illusion
Right.
to a large extent, but real estate prices were way up, inflated, for example, by a lot of Pakistani expats bringing their money back home
Sure.
from America as a direct result of 9/11.
Right.
There were 20-some McDonald's in Lahore, right, which there had not been before.
Absolutely.
That was a big change. McDonald's and Pizza Hut. I think Pizza Hut was already there in the 90s, but
Right. I think it might have come in the late 90s,
yeah.
perhaps. Right.
But Lahore felt like it had kind of turned a corner, and I think that had something to do with the Sharif brothers and Shahbaz
Right.
Sharif being this very sort of strong provincial leader, for better or worse. Lahore was really feeling like a city that was coming into its own, or feeling a lot of its own self-confidence in
Sure.
that time.
And I think 2003, by then, the instability that we see now in Pakistan hadn't really taken root as
Right.
much, because that was, I think the sort of this burgeoning of militancy that we see now, I think really happened after 2004, when the Pakistani military went into the tribal areas, and as a result, there was a lot of
Yeah.
sort of blowback and that.
Well, and Musharraf, there were military actions in Balochistan in
Yes.
2006, and that was, I think, part of the beginning of the end of the Musharraf regime.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely.
And then, of course, the Red Mosque, the Lal Masjid in Islamabad.
That was a huge turning point.
Yeah.
Huge turning point as well. And that's around when we saw the emergence of the Pakistani Taliban
Right.
for the first time as a united organization.
Yeah.
The Nigerian novelist Chimamanda Adichie has spoken very eloquently in one of her TED Talks about the danger of a single story. And in that, when a person or a country is defined by a single narrative. I think what you've done with your book, in Alive and Well in Pakistan, is sort of emerge with multiple and diverse narratives about Pakistan. What would you want the average American to know about Pakistan and Pakistanis that they wouldn't otherwise hear on the nightly news?
Yeah, see, people in general, Americans in particular, and people in general want to know, what should I think about Pakistan or this or that. And this is what Chimamanda Adichie is talking about. And in her wonderful speech, she uses Africa, her own native continent, as an example. She's like, I'm not a, yes, so there's Africa, then there's Nigeria, then there's my own family's social position within Nigeria, then there's the way that my family felt about the people who worked as servants for my family who came from the villages. And there are all these multiple worlds within worlds, and people have different levels of awareness about each other's worlds, right?
Sure.
And so yes, Pakistan, just like Africa, Pakistan suffers from the dangers of a single story. Americans think that they know Pakistan. My friend Todd Shea, who's a great friend of Pakistan, says that Americans hear 2% of the story about Pakistan 100% of the time.
Right.
And that's a wonderful way of putting it. There is a certain version of Pakistan that gets portrayed on the news in America, and on the television news and the internet and all that, and it pervades the awareness of all Americans. It's not a right-wing versus left-wing thing. It's not something you can say the conservative people have the wrong
Right.
idea, but the liberals have the right idea. Americans in general get only 2% of the story 100% of the time. And it's the stereotypes, the people blowing things up, the angry men with beards shouting,
Right.
the violence, the terrorism. And there is so much more to Pakistan. I'm not romantic about it. I am a little bit romantic about it, right? I've had
Right.
I've had wonderful personal experiences in Pakistan. I've been welcomed there. I've been the recipient of so much hospitality and friendship in Pakistan. I feel grateful to Pakistan. I love Pakistan the way I would love a family member or a friend. But my family members and friends are not perfect either.
Sure.
I could tell you all about their flaws, their
Sure.
faults.
Sure.
So I want Americans to understand that Pakistan is a severely damaged society. It's a society with very serious problems, very serious issues, both domestically and in terms of the way that its establishment and its government conduct themselves globally in the world. But it's a society of 180 million human beings, most of whom are just like the 300 million human beings in America who are trying to get by, doing their best from one day to the next, and 1 week and month and year to the next, raising their family, going about their jobs, trying to be useful in society at large. In Pakistan, they're doing things like worrying about whether there's going to be electricity tomorrow, and whether if a housewife goes to the market to buy vegetables, whether there's going to be a bombing in the market.
Absolutely.
So,
You're exactly right. I mean, but sometimes, I mean, you can't also blame Americans who are sort of receiving this news, and some of it is so disturbing and so terrible. I mean, just recently we heard about a very young Christian couple in Pakistan that was killed by an enraged mob because somebody had spread rumors that they had allegedly committed blasphemy, and they were burnt alive. And so, I mean, how do you make sense of that? How would you explain that to an American, who hears that on the news? And then what are they supposed to think?
well, you can't explain it away. I mean, it is appalling. It is inexcusable. It's evil. It's horrible.
Right.
The persecution of religious minorities, not only Christians, but Hindus and Shias and
Sectarian minorities.
Right,
Yeah.
Ahmadis, is a chronic and endemic problem in Pakistan. It's a chronic and endemic problem in any society. And minorities in any society are vulnerable. Muslims in India are vulnerable. So I think the way to address this issue with Pakistanis is to say, you don't like the way Muslims are treated in India, so imagine the situation that Christians in Pakistan must be in. So again, I don't romanticize Pakistan as a wonderful or perfect place. I love it because I've had my own wonderful experiences there, and I want Americans to know that Pakistan is not the monolithically ugly place that you might see on TV. But the ugly stuff is real. The terrorism is real. The dangers of nuclear war are real.
Right.
The persecution of religious minorities is real and appalling. And it's actually one of the first reasons I went to Pakistan. I went there. My personal motivation initially was I wanted to see Kashmir from the Pakistani point of view. But at the time I first went to Pakistan in 1995, there was a very current case of a 14-year-old Christian boy, Salamat Masih, and his uncle, who were in a very similar situation to the couple that just got burned to death. They were the blasphemy law in Pakistan, which is appalling and should never have been put into force, is abused by Muslim Pakistanis to do things like seize the land of their Christian neighbors. If there's a dispute over land in a village, then the Christian people who own the land over here can be accused of desecrating the Quran or committing blasphemy.
I think even in the case of this young couple, it turned out that even though there were no sort of accusations of blasphemy or whatever, it turned out that it was really a dispute over wages.
Right.
And that got them, but they used the blasphemy law. They used not just the law, but just the fact that blasphemy had allegedly been committed to then sort of carry out this terrible, terrible crime. So absolutely, and this, I mean, also at the government level, we see that there's a lot of mistrust between the Pakistani government and the American government, and that has also sort of reflected in the way the two societies view each other.
Right.
I think it was in 2012 that Pew came out with a poll that showed that I think maybe 10% of Americans trusted Pakistan, and maybe about 11% of Pakistanis had a favorable view. The rest of the Pakistani population had a very unfavorable view of America.
Well, I'm glad that a higher percentage of Pakistanis trust America. Yeah.
And so, what do you think average Pakistanis and Americans can do to sort of somehow, alleviate mutual concerns?
Well, Alex Spilius in the Daily Telegraph said the author's real journey is a search for common humanity.
Right.
Right. The way you get to know other people is by showing up and making yourself available to them, and getting to know other people on a personal level. that sounds romantic, it sounds airy-fairy, it sounds intangible,
Right.
but it's real and it's important, and the only way it can happen is for you personally to make yourself available on a personal level to the other people. Now, for Pakistanis or other Muslims in America, that might mean showing up at the potluck supper at the local church down the street,
Sure.
for example. And I think the Pakistanis in America are at fault for being insular and not reaching out enough to their non-Pakistani American neighbors. I took it many steps further, and I went and spent a lot of time in Pakistan, and at one point lived there, and showed up in the general enclosure at Gaddafi Stadium and told everybody in the general enclosure, the cheap seats, that I was American.
Oh, wow.
All my friends said, whatever you do, don't sit in the general enclosure and don't tell anybody that you're American.
Absolutely, yes.
So of course I showed up in the general enclosure and I told everybody that I was an American, and I had 8 hours of just wonderful, interesting conversations with these curious young men who were just thought it was wonderful that this white American had decided to come and sit in the cheap seats with them.
Excellent.
And nobody threatened me. Nobody, they did say, getting back to your earlier question, are you with intelligence?
Right.
But we had a great time, and it was because I had taken the step of showing up, making myself available, making myself vulnerable.
Absolutely.
If we don't make ourselves vulnerable, then we won't get to know each other.
Absolutely, and no, this is wonderful. And I think just we're sort of nearing the end of our time here. But is there any one particular story that you'd like to share with the audience, our American audience, that sort of that you would like them to hear about Pakistan that you experienced? This was one that you just sort of mentioned.
Well, that's the one, maybe. I mean, there are many others. Read my book. It's short-ish. It's 275 pages or so. It's meant to be entertaining and fun. Hopefully you'll learn stuff about the world and about Pakistan along the way. But it's meant to be a book about. It's meant to make you laugh, and it's meant to make you be entertained, and it's meant for you to come away and say, I like these people.
Thank you so much for your time.
Yeah.
I learned so much just by speaking with you over the past half hour, and I would highly recommend your book because it really is so accessible, and it has so many wonderful anecdotes and really reflects well the richness of a culture and a society. So thank you so much for joining us today. To learn more about Ethan's work and to purchase his books, please visit ethancasey.com. Thank you so much for watching. Until next time, this is your host, Mehlika Samdani.